All right, tonight we've got one of our past guests, Niles Heckman, back with us in Grimerica, and he's brought along Rak Razum, and these guys are developing a great documentary series called Shamans of the Global Village. And they both have their own website and their own podcast, and they're both into sort of like the new awakening, psychedelics, and plant medicines and all that. So it's great to have you guys on. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us, fellas. It's good to talk to you again, as always.
Hey, that's actually a good thing to get. Whenever we ask both you a question, we'll go in that order that we just did. So that we're not. See, perfect.
Yeah.
I should also mention we have
always.
Michael here, a friend of the show, is going to jump in like a fly on the wall.
Hey guys, Grimerica.
So guys, I watched your first episode the other night, and it was fantastic. Absolutely loved it. You guys did just a great job.
Well, that was all Niles's amazing work there. I'll let him take the credit.
Do you want to? Can you get in?
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. So, go ahead.
Just describe that first episode. It was. It was just. I don't know. It was a good taste of what's to come, I guess.
Yeah. And, for something that was made kind of independently on a very shoestring budget, it's something that we're very proud of. Rak has a background as kind of an experiential journalist doing a lot within the entheogenic community. And I'll kind of let him introduce himself. And then I have a background working in Hollywood. So the show is kind of the culmination of our two kind of life's work thus far. And we're really proud of it. So thank you for saying so, man. That means a lot.
Yeah, it was good. So how many? Yeah. Go ahead, Rak.
I was going to say, it's a labor of love, and it's something that I've been involved in documenting and working as a journalist, commenting on alternative culture and the rise in shamanism and predominantly ayahuasca. About 10 years ago, I went down to the Amazon as a freelance writer and was writing about the rise in ayahuasca tourism and what the role of the shaman was in the 21st century and what the importance of that was. And I wrote a few books on that and did another documentary on ayahuasca. And it just kept evolving. And there's been such an interest and surge in global interest in both shamanism and plant-based medicines that it really seemed like it was time to document that in an ongoing online TV show.
Nice. That's great. We talk about this quite a bit on the show. Actually, it ends up coming up. We do a little segment even called Trip Reports from listeners who send us their stories about some sort of awakening, usually through psychedelics of one sort or another. And of course, we talk about the exodus to South America for ayahuasca and all that. So it's great to, it's great to be a part of this sort of, I can't kind of think of it as an awakening too. And some of the things that I didn't realize were happening in the first episode when you guys were talking about the main topic was the toad secretion. I can't remember what it's called, but that it was actually, some of these things were global way before we thought they were.
Yeah, I mean, there's been many civilizations across the world that have used plant or animal psychoactive medicines to alter their consciousness, but it's not something like they had a completely different worldview, I guess, than we do nowadays after a few generations of Richard Nixon's instigated war on drugs. You look at the cultures like the Maya or the Olmecs or the Aztecs, or even, throughout Europe, you had the Eleusinian mysteries, which the Greeks had a psychoactive substance they used in an initiation rite, which their ceremonies and their rituals lasted for over 2,000 years. And the Greeks are sort of the bastion of not just democracy, but a lot of mathematics and philosophy and the sort of underpinnings of what became Western civilization. And they had a psychoactive substance that is documented. It's in the historical record. It was punishable by death if you mentioned it, which is probably why it lasted for 2,000 years. But, even slaves and women could partake of that substance. So it sort of transcended politics itself. There's all the sort of druidic sort of cultures through Britain and in Eurasia. There was the magic mushroom and all these other different substances. In India, in the Vedic sort of traditions, they had the soma. They had, things that altered their consciousness, which is in their holy books. there seems to be a lot of evidence coming out lately once we get over the social and institutional sort of dogmas, which point sort of to the fact that most of the world's religions had some psychoactive element to them. Even if you look at cannabis, spelled with a K, K-A-N-B-I-S, was one of the substances used to anoint the Messiah or the Holy One in the Old Testament. They'd use this secretion, this substance where they would rub it over the body and it would have a psychoactive effect. And that was, it's all documented. It's just that the truth is hidden amongst the fine print, I guess, in all these different cultures. And now there seems to be a resurgence in interest, and anthropologically and historically, all these things are on record, and we can look at it with a more objective eye now.
Didn't the Greeks used to have like a spot you went to trip out to, like a Pan?
Are you thinking?
Well,
about...
the Greeks had a few things. There was the Oracle of Delphi, which was a location in Greece, and there was a crevice in the ground which fumes would come up from. And the oracle, who was a woman, would sort of, straddle the crevice, but there was something in the fumes that would alter consciousness. And then she would sort of, the theory was that she would give readings of the future, and she would say pronunciations about future events from that alteration of consciousness. But this is a thing, not just that, but indigenous cultures all around the world and tribal cultures, and even cultures which then became more city-based and grew away from their relationship with nature, they still all remember that, altering consciousness is part of the human birthright. And there's been so many traditions which became sort of formalized more as religious traditions. And then as the priestcraft took over, the original sacrament was sort of usually, edited out. And then we've ended up with this sort of fossilization of dogmas. But all of these original streams had, some original catalyst to them.
Yeah. And that was the Kykeon at the Eleusinian Mysteries, kind of the name of the sacrament that was used there for, it was well over 2,000 years they used that. I think it was more like 2,500 years. So that says a lot. If a sacrament was kind of used as an initiatory mystery school at that time of such high antiquity and high Renaissance. So I think in past times, we've really done things in better ways than we do them now, and we've kind of lost track of some of that lineage of our kind of entheogenic past in terms of kind of spirituality.
It also brings to the fore the idea that, what is civilization and what is a culture? If you go all the way down to a tribal level, they have survival amongst them, and, they're born into it and over many, many generations. But usually then they have an ideology, and we need, we're doing this recording on Election Day in America, and it's like, what is it that bonds, culture together? It's like you have something like the American dream, or you have something that brings you together. And in many of these original cultures, they had an authentic experience. They had a connection with nature, and in altering their consciousness, not in ways that we think of just to shift consciousness, but to bring them back into a relationship with nature and to expand their consciousnness, to give them an understanding of what they were embedded in and what, life really was. And then they could live in right relationship. And that itself was often a survival mechanism. But, these cultures would often, and it still happens today in the Amazon basin, many cultures take things like ayahuasca together, and they share a group experience, a group bonding that really transcends what we have, which is sort of politics, religion, and Facebook, So it's like these things can really be a lot more, bring a lot more depth to what it means to be a culture and to have these unified experiences between you.
Yeah, I never really realized until a couple of years ago the wide variety of these natural plant medicines. I only thought of like mushrooms, and I don't even know if I knew of that many back then. All of a sudden I'm realizing there's 10, 20 different types that people are...
I always knew peyote because it was in, remember those old Billy the Kid movies? Emilio Estevez was Billy the Kid. They ate the peyote. I was like, I love those movies when I was a kid, so I knew what peyote was, like, before I even smoked pot.
Wasn't there an episode of The Simpsons where Homer had some psychedelic hot chili or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember that too. Homer's had a couple psychedelic experiences, yeah. Now I'm going to have to dig that up.
Yeah, that's intro. A good point. That's a good point to highlight the separation of a culture that's, like something in the industrialized first world or the Western world that might have had some experiences with entheogens, or what you might call, hasn't had this lineage to shamanism to kind of put the experience into the kind of proper container. So maybe I'm sure that most of your guys' listeners on this show, it's a pretty kind of sophisticated crowd, but are familiar with what shamanism is. But maybe we'll just have kind of Rack give the kind of separation between taking medicine or an earth-based medicine in the context of a shaman versus just doing it willy-nilly in those contexts.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, the Western idea of what what shamanism is has, evolved over the last half century or so. But if you go to indigenous cultures, the shaman is a very specialized role. Most indigenous cultures will have their hunters and gatherers, and they may have chieftains, or they may have sort of various levels of hierarchy. But the shaman's sort of outside of all that as well. It's someone who has a foot in both worlds and works on behalf of the village, mediating their health and their relationship with nature. It's often seen as a healer in the West. When the early 20th century sort of anthropology was studying different medicines and different peoples across the world, they would see that all these different cultures had a medicine person, and they was responsible for the health of their tribe and mediating their right relationships. But the West basically threw all that together under the blanket term shaman, which originally came from the word saman, which was part of the Siberian medicine work. And since then, we've had this brand. It's almost become this idea of what is a shaman. It's a very mythic archetype in the West, especially because we've had the absence of the shaman. We basically killed our shamans. We killed our witches and our herbalists and our medicine people. 500 years ago, Western culture, whether that was the British or the Spanish or the Portuguese, as they went over to the first world again and to cultures like South America, and they found cultures which were using entheogenic plants or plants which expand consciousness, they considered them the work of the devil. And so they tried to kill them off as well. And so it basically resulted in the fact that we had an absence of the shaman in our culture.
That's a pretty apt description, actually. I haven't heard it described that way before, how we killed off our shaman, but it makes a lot of sense.
That's kind of what I was going to ask, is how this whole clampdown on our sovereignty of our consciousness, right? Like Graham Hancock would say, we deserve sovereignty over our own consciousness. How much of that was done on purpose, or was it intentional, or was it just a matter of the way the West was sort of created? Did it happen sort of by accident, just as we evolve?
Well, there was lots of forces at work. Mainly it was, forces of religion hundreds of years ago. And those forces of religion saw anything outside of themselves, out of their way to approach God, or their cultural, approach was wrong or evil. And then we've inherited that Judeo-Christian sort of religion and that sort of energy. And it's really had a bias towards anything which is outside of the usual sort of spectrum of existence. Anything which, even now we have a war on not just psychoactive plants, but a war on herbs and a war on plants themselves, because we have a pharmaceutical industry now that has an incredible vested interest in the money and in using artificial things which have patents on them and chemicals which affect us and have contraindications. But we basically have a war on nature. This is it. It's basically we've distanced ourselves from nature and from knowing the right rhythms, and we've been living in cities, and now over 51% of people in the world live in cities. It's a majority of humanity now live in these concrete urban environments, and we don't have an inbuilt relationship with nature. We've forgotten what it means, and so we're reestablishing that. And so this reawakening and this interest again in not just psychoactive plant medicines, but herbs and things that nature can give us. And you look at permaculture, and you look at going back to the land and establishing right relationships. This sort of feels to me about what it's all about. It's not even just about shamanic awakening or a spiritual awakening. It's about us awakening to the fact that we live on a planet that's not in a city, and we need to, be in relationship with it.
So you must have seen that change quite a bit over the last decade since you've been involved in this for so long now. I mean, unless we've been in a bubble over the last few years, but it seems like there's a huge increase, and even like
we're definitely in somewhat of a self-induced bubble.
We are, but I mean, I keep bumping into people that have gone down to South America and they've tried this, and then there's all these festivals the festivals seem to be more and more popular, and it seems to overlap with this culture as well. So it must be growing. I mean, is there a chance that, I don't know, is there a hope for it to overtake the war on nature?
The dominant patriarchal culture, which has led us to the brink of extinction and is killing us slowly all over the planet. Yes, there is a hope. But this is the thing. It's like, okay, if you want the big picture, it's like basically, I mean, here's a big hello. The Earth is alive. And it's not only it's alive, it has a sentience or a sapience or some type of active intelligence which basically grooms and grows the species on the Earth to be in maybe not always cooperation, but to move energy around and to be in synergy. So, ecosystems and natural systems are meant to be flowing energy from one to the other. And, our waters and our forests and our air, all of them work together. It's like, so the plants and the condensation cycle and the air cycle, nature knows what she's doing. And she has made all her species, including humans, which, somewhere along the line seem like we've fallen out of balance. And so that falling out of balance seems to be as long as recorded history in the last 10,000 years or so, or as Terence McKenna used to call it, his story, because it's written by the victors. The story of what happens in history is written by those who have the power and have the money and have controlled the vested interests. And if we look at what's happening in the world today, we are living in the crescendo, the tail end of history of all that's come before, and we fucked up the planet, excuse my French. We've actually fallen out of right relationship. We poisoned the waters. We poisoned the earth. We've taken out all the natural resources. Like, if you think of the earth as a macro organism, like a large-scale single organism with all these other organisms which are the species within it, and if you look at our human body, imagine if you started to take out all the calcium, or just all your proteins, or all one bit out of your body. Your body's going to go into cardiac arrest and start shutting down. It's going to start to try to fight the infection. So potentially what's happening from the planet on a more Gaian holistic level as the planet as a whole is that she's actually fighting back and having an immune response syndrome. She's actually, secreting these substances which have been out there for a while, and things like ayahuasca, yes, they have really skyrocketed in popular understanding in the last decade or so, precisely because they work, and they are a bit of a immune response syndrome from the planet herself, and they can give a very short, sharp whack to the head to wake you up. And the thing is, we don't have a lot of time. We're in this slow march over the cliff, or the analogy of if you throw a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out. But if you slowly boil the water, it'll, if you just replace one president with the next, and one crooked company with the next crooked company, and one bad law with the next bad law, eventually things just get so worse, people don't see it, or they don't have a trigger point where they realize it's so bad. But we have a trigger point. We know that the environment is in rapid transformation and degradation. We know the amount of oxygen level, CO2 levels in the air. We know all of these things which science is telling us are at a really critical level, and things are not going to be the same. And the thing is, what is it that's happening? Planet Earth is changing. We're part of planet Earth. And by taking substances like ayahuasca, or the Sonoran desert toad, which is the subject of our documentary, or San Pedro cactus, or Salvia divinorum, or psilocybin mushrooms, or you name the dozens and dozens of plants which are secreted by the planet herself and are designed for mammals to use. And what do? They reveal within us that we have these relationships with nature. They expand our consciousness to bring us back to the levels that we perhaps once had when we were in synergy with nature, before we got sick, before the fall of consciousness. And, it's an emergency here on planet Earth. And these are not things to be taken lightly. There's a great trust and a great responsibility in using these substances. But overall, I think the planet herself is saying, wake the fuck up.
Yeah, it's so sad that we don't hear about this on the mainstream media. Like when I watched the first episode there, I guess that was about the Sonoran frog, right? Or desert toad, I guess you would call it. The guy Octavio or whoever has been doing that he's done it to so many people, right? I mean, so many people have gone through this process. Many of them healed through many things, including addiction. You know, we should be hearing more about this. You know, somewhere else in the mainstream a bit.
Yeah, so episode 1 features the work of Dr. Octavio Rettig. He's a Mexican-trained doctor who had his own battle with addiction. He was a crack addict off and on for many years, and as part of that, he sort of went back to his Mexican heritage, and he was working with some other plant-based medicines like, it wasn't ayahuasca, I think there was San Pedro cactus and others, to help him try to kick his addiction. And eventually he was introduced to the Bufo alvarius, or the Sonoran desert toad, which is native to the north of Mexico in the Sonoran desert region. And, you know, he had a great success in kicking his own addiction to crystal meth or to crack. And from that, he realized that these substances were more powerful for him than Western pharmaceuticals, which only masked the problem or created another problem and was sort of part of the problem. You know, it was like that these substances can help re-engineer your own relationship to health, and they can help you see what's at the root cause of your addiction. There's a very famous Western doctor called Dr. Gabor Mate, who's been working with ayahuasca the last few years. But for 20 years or so in Canada, you might know of him. He's been working with addiction and addiction therapy and recovery. And, you know, he says basically at the root of all addiction is trauma. And a lot of times it goes back to early childhood trauma, things like that, sexual trauma, and that there's something in our emotional bodies which is causing us to lash out and to act out in this way to try to you know, fill the gap or cover over the pain. There's pain. You know, we're experiencing this thing of this disconnection from our natural state. And so these substances, it's not just that they have a physical effect. Quite often what they do, say with things like ayahuasca, is that they also reveal what's in your subconscious mind and they bring it up to the fore, or they work on the emotional body. So things that you've been holding onto and carrying with you, even if you're consciously aware of it or not, that really becomes very obvious, and it comes up and it is dealt with by the conscious mind. And that then gets to the root cause of the addiction. So all these Western pharmaceuticals that they give us, whether they have an addiction interrupting capacity or not, they're just more and more chemicals, and they're creating a chemical dependency on our physical bodies, which quite often doesn't deal with the emotional problem. For that, they'll give you Prozac or another pharmaceutical, you know, that keeps you doped up as well. So these substances from the earth, these shamanic medicines, can help you get in touch with your own inner shamanic core, your own ability to be your own medicine. And you're not just taking something to fix you, you're getting in touch with your soul, essentially. And then you're starting to work on your own relationship with yourself.
Yeah, and the legal drugs now are killing for years. Legal drugs have been killing people by overdose more than the illegal drugs, which is saying something about big pharma and the hole that's making. Now, is there any chance of addiction to these types of drugs in themselves? I mean, I've heard of some people that have gotten rid of chronic pot addictions or other type of addictions, but then you hear they've been on 50 or 60 of these, weekend episode type things. I mean, is there a chance that becomes a problem?
No. I mean, I've never heard of anyone saying they're addicted to ayahuasca or addicted to the Bufo alvarius toad. These are incredibly strong medicines. I mean, they're strong on a psychic level, on what your consciousness experiences, what it reveals. They're not something you do lightly. They're not recreational. You can't just go out and party on them. They're incredibly profoundly transformative tools of consciousness itself. And, you know, they have a built-in sort of equilibrium to them, in that you physically can't take too much of these substances. I mean, you're not going to necessarily overdose on them because they're natural substances. And in a lot of the shamanic communities and people I talk with, they say that these things, because, you know, the Bufo alvarius toad, for instance, you know, it spends 9 months of the year underground in the earth, nurturing its venom sacs, which contain bufotenine and 5-MeO-DMT, which is also native to the human brain. But, you know, the medicine that's in its body, which when it comes up above the earth for a few months, it can be harvested from it. It doesn't hurt the toad. It can be milked and dried, and then that substance can be smoked. But these things, they're natural substances. So our bodies recognize the fact that these are other natural substances. So they're not artificial chemicals. And there's a built-in tolerance level.
And
now, there are warnings for people, in shamanic ceremonies. There's duty of care and there's health things you need to look out for in terms of contraindications with different substances and how they work. But if those things are adhered to and taken care of, I feel in general they're a lot more safe than artificial pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Niles, what was it like for you?
Yeah, and the thing about them is that ultimately you can. Go ahead.
No. Keep going. Keep going.
There's a slight delay there.
I was just going to add to that ultimately you can only. Ultimately, you can only really heal you, through your own will. So these kind of shamanic medicines, these earth-based medicines, which we're kind of highlighting on the show, and the concept for the show, like Rack mentioned, is to have each episode focus on a specific medicine and a specific medicine person. It's you can only heal you, but these are fabulous catalysts for healing, and healing not so much in the Western sense of I'm sick, I have a cold, I need medicine, but a major part of healing is kind of coming into wholeness, which is understanding some of the things that Rack has highlighted in terms of consciousness expansion and not living in a kind of world that's destroying their planet or X, Y, and Z. So it's much more of a broader, wider sense in terms of the word healing. It's not just a physical sickness, but it's more or less kind of a global or societal mental sickness.
Yeah.
You know what would happen in ancient China? Apparently, the rich families would have their own in-house doctors, but the doctor would only get paid and remain on staff if people remained well. They weren't called on to fix a cold or to fix a problem. If something went wrong, then they would get in trouble. And it's this is, I think, is what we're going through. We're having to revolutionize and see that essentially our entire modern culture is sick. It's completely out of alignment with integrity of right relationship with the planet, with ourselves. It's driven by money. It's driven by pharmaceutical interests and vested interests. And it's we just need to wipe the slate clean. And, when we have a shamanic experience with these earth-based medicines, they're incredibly profound transformers of consciousness. And, for people that have experienced it, you can talk about it. For people that haven't experienced it, it's almost like trying to describe having sex with someone, right? It's very intimate and it's very personal. And on the outside, one of the challenges of making documentary films about shamanic experiences is that when you film the experience itself, the ceremony itself, you're only getting the outside flesh body. You're seeing the person either roll around or go through some type of somatic body effect. Yeah. But that's sort of just the after effect, or you're seeing them process energy. You're seeing them in very intimate situation, but you're just seeing what's happening on the outside. On the inside is what it's all about. On the inside, using your intuition and your connection to what you're going through, is you're connecting to other states of being. And this is what tribal cultures, indigenous cultures understand, is that we are embedded in their cosmology. The physical world is embedded in an energetic ecology. And that energetic ecology we might call the astral, or, in modern quantum physics, we might say hyperdimensions or other dimensions. But it has its own energetics. It has its own perhaps entities or beings that live there. It has its own place, and it interacts with us and it's part of us. And we need to learn how to interact with it. But these are very profound experiences which have for 100 years or more in the West been just discarded with the term hallucination.
Yeah.
When LSD was first used in the late 40s and early 50s in psychotherapy before it was illegal, one of the terms they gave it was psychomimetic, which meant that it induced what was considered to be psychosis. But in indigenous cultures, they don't have psychosis. They do not have crazy people traditionally, because both they are supported by the tribe and they are understood. And there are often, people in indigenous cultures which have variances away from the normal capacity for consciousness. They might be sensitive to certain things, or they might have, just different abilities. But those people are usually nurtured in their tribe. And the ones who are really sensitive are made their shamans, are made their medicine people. They see that they have a sensitivity for them, and they give them the role and responsibility of using that sensitivity to connect with the subtle energetics of the energetic ecology we're embedded in, and to use those skills on behalf of their tribe. In our culture, we label people crazy and we medicate them because we're crazy. You know, there's that J. Krishnamurti quote. It's no accomplishment to be, you know, adjusted to an insane society and call yourself sane. It's like we've totally got it round the wrong way in our culture.
Yeah, well, thankfully things are changing. So, Niles, what was it like? I was going to ask you about kind of what Rack was just talking about. People filming people for this documentary in their some of their most vulnerable moments. Like, that's one of the things that shocked me is you guys got it's a lot of pretty intense footage of people going through these experiences.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I mean, it's some of the most kind of profound stuff that I've shot to date because I have kind of a background as one of my kind of primary art forms that I love to do in my spare time is street photography, which is a very kind of candid form of, you know, photographing people without necessarily knowing it on the street. And this show is kind of shot in a street photography style where it's just kind of me observing in a documentary fashion in this kind of candid street photography way, but then also trying to highlight in a cinematic kind of beautiful portrayal some of these amazing experiences people are going through. So in this episode, I mean, some of the footage is so amazing. Like the episode concludes in a ceremony, for example, that has numerous things in it that I think have probably never really been filmed before, or at least not in this way, or not at this like level of production value. So that documenting of that stuff just kind of happens to come about because of kind of the structure of the nature of how the show had been made, you know, through kind of Rack's ties and connections to the community and kind of knowing Octavio and having a background, having done the medicine with Octavio and kind of choosing Octavio as the subject for the first episode, which is a big responsibility that Rack has to kind of who are we going to highlight per episode, because we obviously want to focus on somebody that's a very honorable, kind of balanced person, and none of these medicine people that we highlight per episode would be perfect. But then sharing their lives kind of in a filmmaking sense on the documentary front, as kind of documentary filmmakers, is what we're trying to do with the show. And I think the first episode did that pretty effectively, and I think we're pretty proud of what came out of it.
Yeah, it was a really good balance between that raw street photography style and a professional appearance. Like, I think you guys did a really good job. So what's next? What's the next episode you guys are going to do? Like, what, you're doing a different one on different type of medicine with a different sort of shamanic healer there?
Yeah, I think we mentioned it a little bit before, but essentially there are lots of different shamanic medicines. The term that was invented for this in the 80s, it was entheogen, which was to distance it a bit from the psychedelics and more man-made chemicals. And it comes from the Greek. It means to invoke the divine within, which may sound a bit grandiose, but I mean, some of these things you can really have very profound experiences on them like that. So the first episode came about, as Niall said, because I also sat with and experienced the Bufo Alvarius toad medicine with Dr. Octavio Rettig. And there are many other practitioners within the global shamanic community. And this is the thing, you know, basically I've been for a decade or so involved with the ayahuasca community worldwide. I've got 2 books and a documentary out on ayahuasca. And what I was noticing from that, you know, my original intention to go down to Peru in 2006, which was the same year that National Geographic Adventure put its cover story out on ayahuasca. And since then, you know, every mainstream media outlet in the world pretty much has covered ayahuasca and the interest in it. And my original intent was to look at, well, what is the role of the shaman in the 21st century and why is that important? And it's sort of still the same central question for this show. And so what I've noticed is it's not just ayahuasca, though. On the coattails, in a sense, of the popularity of ayahuasca, many indigenous cultures around the world have been caretakers for these medicines and still use them. And many different cultures, like in Mexico, there's the psilocybin mushrooms. And, you know, that's actually probably, you know, the West's first major entheogen or shamanic medicine, because back in the 1950s, Gordon Wassoon, who was an investment banker and vice president of JP Morgan at the time and an amateur mycologist, he went down to Mexico in search of the magic mushroom and then eventually reported on it for Life magazine, which came out in 1957. And that sort of predated the LSD revolution in the 60s. And, you know, the Native American curanderas, or the medicine women who work with the magic mushrooms, they're in Mexico. Mexico has a lot of these substances. The Sonoran Desert toad is there. The Aliliquai, or the morning glory seeds, are around that region as well. But all over Mexico, South America, Australia has many DMT-containing acacia plants. There's the Siberian Amanita muscaria, the red and white sort of dotted mushroom, which almost every year invariably I see in my Facebook feeds. You'll see these stories about the true origins of Christmas, and basically the Siberian shamans. If you can't eat the Amanita muscaria mushroom raw, you can die. It can poison the liver. But the reindeers of Siberia would eat the mushroom, and then the Siberian shamans would actually drink reindeer urine because the reindeers' livers would process it. And a lot of the origins of like the flying reindeers and all the Christmas sort of origins seem to come from that central sort of source. But there's those, as we mentioned on top of the show, peyote in North America with the Native American Indians. San Pedro cactus is also in North America and in parts of Central America and across the world. These substances, in fact, seem to be secreted by the planet herself in different bioregions, and due to the increase in popularity of shamanism now, people are also grafting and growing them in the right climates around the world. And the idea of the show is to focus on different practitioners who work with these different medicines in different areas around the world in the global village, and to see, not just what are the effects of this medicine and watch people taking them, but to really focus on what is the role of the shaman in the 21st century, what are the pitfalls, what are the problems they experience, how is this resurgence in the shamanic archetype affecting people and the communities that they work with. Yeah.
Niles, do you have anything to say about that? Huh. Niles? I don't know if he's still there.
And it cut out there for my thing because I know my side of the conversation's a little choppy here, but go ahead and ask again.
I was going to say Dr. Octavia had some sort of UN permit as well. So, I mean, us living in this bubble in North America, not realizing that a lot of the globe is a little bit more open to this. I mean, that's pretty positive to see.
Yeah, the toad, the medicine toad is 5-MeO-DMT, and it's actually only illegal in 7 countries throughout the world. In the rest of the world, it's totally legal.
There you go. Is Canada?
You can get the toad in Canada?
I do believe that Canada is legal. Yeah. But, we must distinguish. It's not 5-MeO is actually endogenous to the human brain. It's something which is part of consciousness itself. Tryptamines, which 5-MeO is one of. There's pinealine, there's N,N-dimethyltryptamine, and 5-methoxy dimethyltryptamine. Serotonin, they go down the serotonin pathways. These are things which are very inimical to the human consciousness itself. It's like they're at the root of part of what helps us navigate in consciousness itself. Dr. Rick Strassman did these tests with N,N-dimethyltryptamine over 20 years ago now, which is recounted in the book DMT, The Spirit Molecule. And the theory is that these things are, you can get a surge of DMT at birth or at death or at near-death experiences, and people often see things like the white light tunnel. So N,N-dimethyltryptamine, they say, might be the thing which helps mediate us going into the dreaming each night and going into that sort of realm of consciousness. And 5-MeO-DMT is essentially what mystics throughout history have described as the white light tunnel, and that rejoining of that sense of the divine or source, or going back to that oceanic experience of consciousness itself. But it's not just in the toad, it's actually, in the human organism. And the toad it's not quite an endangered species, but it is in very small supply, and the region of the desert that it is native to is also the Mexican drug cartels sort of territory. So there's a lot of supply and demand issues, and there's a lot of issues around protecting the toad and making sure that its conservation is a priority. But essentially, 5-MeO-DMT, which is the key compound in the toad that's discussed in episode 1, that substance is not illegal in most countries of the world. These things can often be in a grey area of the law. It doesn't mean that they're actually legal. It just means that they're not illegal. Basically, Richard Nixon brought this all in with the 1971 Psychotropic Drug Convention, which was designed to sort of counteract the LSD revolution of the 60s, which was a direct threat to the establishment because it totally changed the social dynamics. There's been tests with LSD that have been done on rats, and they say that if you give one rat LSD and put it back into the cage with the other rats basically kill it. And not because it's on LSD, but because it doesn't adhere to the social norm and to the subtle signals that all the other rats give off. And if you're not going to play the culture game and the societal game, well, then you're a threat. So, LSD had this big revolution, essentially, in the 1960s, which really changed the course of history. And because of that, Richard Nixon instigated the war on drugs, and throughout the 70s, also the cocaine and crack wars and the CIA and all those all the other nefarious dealings that they did under the covers. But the United Nations signatory countries essentially inherited this, and some of the only people or countries that were able to filter that out were the ones that lobbied that they should keep their indigenous plant medicines, which are essentially the shamanic medicines, things like coca and ayahuasca and things like that. Which weren't signatory or weren't subject to that overarching law. And so because of that, and sometimes under Analog Act loopholes, these shamanic medicines have managed to survive into the modern day. And, Indigenous peoples all around the world still take them. It's only that it's new to Western people as we come back into the fold and come back into relationship with these medicines. And so there are opportunities for people to go to countries like Peru and partake of these medicines, or perhaps if they are not illegal in their native country. But usually the other thing you've got to really remember is there is a lineage to these things and there is a correct way to do them. And just because they may be not illegal, we're not really suggesting people rush off and find a toad and try to smoke it themselves. There's definitely a duty of care and a right way to do these things, and there's guidance that is needed in learning to approach them.
You keep answering my question right before I'm about to ask it, and that was, do you guys have advice for people that just want to smoke DMT? Like, let's say they've ordered it from a reputable friend, or they found some, and they want to just smoke some DMT. Is that do you have any advice for people that want to do that?
Say it's been kicking around for over a year.
Yeah, well, obviously, we do not condone doing anything illegal, even if Richard Nixon instigated these illegal laws to begin with. I don't know, if you're saying you've got some DMT in your brain and you'd like to know how to activate it, we know what you can do. You can go in a darkness ritual for 10 to 14 days and your brain will spontaneously start to secrete these tryptamines. But in regards to external chemical DMT, maybe check out Erowid, EROWID.org. It's a not-for-profit that's been around about 20 years, and it has a lot of information around chemicals and drug usage. There is a little bit of, there's a lot of overlap, but essentially, even if you look on sites like, if you look on social media, and there are so many sort of psychedelic sites and shamanic sites and plant medicine sites. Funnily enough, the psychonauts or the psychedelic sites seem to outnumber the shamanic medicine ones about 10 to 1 on the likes and the hits. There seems to be an incredible, audience out there who are interested in psychedelics, which at the moment, the Western tradition for that is really steering towards reabsorbing it back into the medical model. There's organizations like MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, who are having their 30th anniversary conference next April in Oakland, California. Mm-hmm. And they've been working with scientists and doctors and the government to do legal tests with psychedelic substances for people. Unfortunately, they usually have to do them on people who are terminally ill or at late stages of cancer or things like that, because that's the very narrow bandwidth the government and the FDA allows them to do it in. But essentially, there's great interest in psychedelics, and there's lots of different organizations around, and there's lots of community organizations which can you can look into, and they can help you have support and structure and community for exploring the psychedelic world. There's also, it's sort of like a brother and sister team. There's a related sort of shamanic community, which, because of the nature of the beast, and sometimes these ceremonies can be, if not illegal, they're still sort of in a grey area of the law. And so there's sort of an underground shamanic community, but there's definitely a global community that does these substances. But there's a whole different set and setting, to use Tim Leary's old term about taking psychedelics. There's a whole different context that they're done in. There's traditionally, it's not necessarily something that you just take and that, you're on a drug or you don't have any support mechanism or you're doing recreationally, shamanic substances essentially are best done as a part of a ritual or, as Niall said earlier, as part of a container. So, one of the great things that I've seen come out of the ayahuasca movement and be taken up globally is not just the idea of ayahuasca itself, but the idea of ceremony, the idea that there's a facilitator, whether that's a shaman or not. And in the West, there's a whole generation now of shamanic facilitators that don't necessarily have the experience of indigenous shamans that, from an early age they're chosen and they're on very arduous dietas and reducing what foods they eat to increase their sensitivity to work with plants. And they might train as shamans for literally decades to get the requisite experience to feel like they can help heal people. But there has been in the last 10 or 20 years or so a whole generation of sort of neo-shamanic facilitators that are on the shamanic path and are learning and doing their best to be facilitators of the medicine and to hold space, to hold a container for ceremony itself. And the idea of an ayahuasca circle or things like that is now transcending just the thing that you take. It's the idea of the community coming together, having this container of a night where you take this substance, this sacred shamanic medicine as part of the community, and you go on your individual journey and you have your intent. It might be working on an individual healing or something you want to work on, but there's a great synergy and a great sort of cohesion when people come together in a ritual and do this work versus just taking it alone. So there's a growth in both the psychedelic communities and the shamanic communities, and there's a lot of overlap, but there's a slightly different ways that it can be approached.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of thinking of like the LSD revolution of the 60s, where we had people dropping acid in Golden Gate Park, but it was such a culture that was so new to a sacrament that it hadn't had the time to learn how to work with it in a shamanistic practice because it was such a short-lived history of that chemical. So, LSD, which is the chemical component of, is very similar to the morning glory seeds. And, indigenous culture would have usage of those seeds over hundreds, if not thousands of years, where they would have had the time to learn how to shamanize it properly and then put it in that container. So the person taking it gets way more out of it and, has a much more high rate of having either an expansion of consciousness or healing. So that's kind of, that's well said.
I wonder, I mean, it's bad enough that the war on drugs and the demonization has caused enough problems just by making these substances taboo and harder to get. But I wonder how many generations it'll take to kind of, like even now, people get bad trips for different reasons, but I often wonder how much just the fact that in the back of your head, you're breaking some fucking law that could send you to jail, like that's got to play some sort of a role in your experience. You're not like taking them into fruit freedom.
It definitely creates a negative imprint in people. But again, that's really why I think the shamanic community globally is so important as well, because you have a sense of well-being and belonging. And that, with the right container and if you're with the right people, you're doing something which is exercising your own right to consciousness, but you're also partaking of substances which have a lineage that goes back to indigenous cultures and connects to the planet and to all these tribes around the planet. And you're plugging back into something which is sacred. And it's not about drugs. It's not about breaking the law. It's about your own right to plug back into sacred. I mean, what a world we live in where the sacredness of life itself is illegal, where it's like, they say that the law should not be able to differentiate between the container which contains the substance and the substance itself. So if we have NN-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT in our own brains, how is that any different from the toad? How is that any different from plants which contain these substances? And in a sense, we're just sort of accentuating or deepening our own relationship with these pathways of the divine. But it's definitely something which, if you're part of a shamanic lineage, it is a medicine culture, and it's a culture sometimes which may have rules, it may have structure, it may have ways that you are meant to accurately and sort of more honorably work with these medicines. And there can be, especially around things like ayahuasca, there's dietary rules, there's ways to maximize your approach to the medicine, there's things to watch out for. And all of that means preparation. It means you have to approach it in a more mature way, in a more respectful way, and that you're also connected to a lineage that is teaching you the way. And so it's really coming back into that global family of shamanic practitioners.
How much is the
and that,
go ahead, Niles.
Go ahead, man. Oh, I was just going to say, and that's kind of what we're trying to highlight per episode on the show is, for example, like Octavio, who's the highlight of the first episode, is somebody that, is technically a Westerner. I mean, he's a Mexican, and his primary language is Mexican as a Western-trained general practitioner. But he has worked with the indigenous community. So he's kind of had that, I guess you want to say, training or maybe even initiation into the indigenous people who have had once a legacy with this shaman. That's kind of a good thing to highlight and try and focus on per episode, is that kind of that dynamic where each episode hopefully will focus on somebody who may be a Westerner but has done it through the lineage of the indigenous community.
Right. That's a good point. So how much is with the increase of all this this interest in psychedelics and entheogens, how has the whole festival scene played a role in that, or are they totally connected and they're going alongside each other, like things like Burning Man and these other music festivals? Like I've only been to one recently, but it does remind me of sort of a neo-shamanistic thing with people like with the music and the bass and the beats and the whole environment there.
It's definitely connected, but you know where all that springs from. Basically, the whole modern conscious festival communities and the Burning Man and all the other like global festivals. You get a boom in Portugal, all through Europe they have electronic music festivals. Here in Australia they do. America there's huge festivals as well. But that is all a direct legacy, essentially, of Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters doing the acid tests. Uh-huh. The acid tests in the 60s were the first example of this reclamation of this archaic ritual of trance dancing to like strobe lights and to electronic music or amplified music, and to come back into a tribal group gathering. That's the real legacy of the acid tests, and that was through acid. But it then went to Goa in India. A lot of the hippies that were turned on to LSD in the late 60s went over to India and Goa. That actually formed the whole Goa electronic music scene, which then came back to London. And then there was the second Summer of Love in 88, 89 over there. That was then carried over to America in the early 90s and became, by the mid to late 90s, the rave movement. And the successive waves over generational time of, people embracing altered consciousness. And that has now blossomed into the global festival culture that we see all around the planet. So these places can definitely be sort of containers for not just altered, definitely altered states, but not just that you take something to go in an altered state. If you've been to Burning Man, it's an altered state in itself.
Yeah.
It's the reclamation of what Terence McKenna used to call it the archaic revival. Here's a culture which goes out there onto the playa and they build everything, they take everything away again. But when you're there, it induces an altered state because it's outside the norms of society. It's outside the normal parameters, and it's a ritual. It's a giant shamanic ritual. And this is the thing, shamanism isn't, just contained in substances. It's a state of mind. It's a state of being. Mm. And so when we go in what's called liminal zones, or zones which are outside the normal parameters of culture, which is really work orientated and 9 to 5, and it's got white picket fence type ideology to it. You go outside of that, and then you end up in these liminal zones where you get to express yourself, you get to make art, you get to dance, you get to make love. I don't know. It's these zones of freedom. It's these zones which actually go all the way back to what indigenous cultures would do when they had that ability to connect nature. Here in Australia, with the Australian Aborigines, they would have these corroborees, which were these intertribal gatherings, every year or so at different seasonal junctures. And they were parties. There were parties and celebration and feasts, just like the pagans have feasts around certain, times of year, which are celebrating seasonal shifts. And in the West, all those seasonal shifts have been, subverted and turned into sugar-fueled festivals celebrating, Easter Bunny or Father Christmas or things like that. They've totally made it into mercantile gift giving and money, when originally it's all about the planet. And so when you look at festival culture, it's still about the planet. You go outside the cities, you go back to nature, you celebrate. You celebrate the joy of being alive and of coming together as a community. So it's definitely related.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I mean that's the feeling I got. Is it was more of a gathering than
festivals.
Go ahead, Niles.
Oh, sorry, man. I was just going to. One thing about festivals is that they're quite kind of a pilgrimage as well, and nothing with great reward doesn't come with a little bit of kind of risk and trial and tough work, I would say. So I've found that anytime I've been at a festival, there's been interesting kind of synchronistic things that have happened in life because you made the effort to get there. So that's kind of just another layer of the icing on the cake to add to what Rack just said. So go ahead, man.
Yeah, definitely. No, I was going to say it feels like they're more than just a venue for using entheogens or something like that, or experiencing altered state. It really is an environment where people can be themselves and be free and get together with other sort of loving, like-minded people. It just, you leave all the garbage at home, and that's what it felt like for me. And I've only been to like one of them, but so Rack, can you give us an example? Like, can we get a little bit granular on somebody's experience, like an experience of healing, or what a typical experience of healing might go through for these? Because it's not people just going down there and having these experiences. There are profound changes, like worldview changes and huge life changes from these. Can you give us a couple examples so people understand the just sort of the importance of it?
The other thing is, like, all the different shamanic entheogens can have varied effects.
Right.
The subject of episode 1, which is the Sonoran Desert Toad, is pretty much like the Tyrannosaurus Rex of entheogens. It's like the king of them all, in the sense that it's so incredibly profound. It's probably the strongest entheogen on the planet, and it's not a macho thing to say that. Well, they're all initiations, but this one is a very specific initiation. It's I mentioned before, it's like the white light mystic tunnel. This sense of rejoining the source, or this oceanic sort of sense of unconditional love. And these are just words. And obviously on your own internal experience with this medicine, you will have your own words for it. But invariably, it's a sense of the divine. And this is something which is so, censored and shied away from, and culturally almost unrecognized anymore. This sense of the divine. We can say things like psychedelics, we can say things like medicines, we can say indigenous and all these other buzzwords. Mm-hmm. But if you get to the heart of it and you say, well, what's the experience of the Sonoran Desert Toad? It's an experience of the divine, and not just external to you, but internal to you, that you are a divine vehicle for the expression of divine energies on the earth. And that can really put a lot of people off. They're used to people talking about ayahuasca and seeing visions and seeing maybe snakes, or seeing fractal geometries like a DMT vision, mm-hmm. or experiencing entities, or seeing Madre ayahuasca, or having an incredible healing experience and healing their cancer or tumor, or their emotional relationship with their parents. And that's all good and well. But I mean, each of these different entheogens will have a varied effect. And, I find that the Sonoran Desert Toad is the most profound medicine that I've experienced in a shamanic setting. That the medicine that it gives is this reconnection to source, and that is an incredible healing experience that then trickles down through your body, through your consciousness, and can have a somatic body effect. I call it like God's factory reset. It can often seem to flush clean your whole body back to sort of a natural state of being. But essentially, I mean, people have to be ready for these substances. They're not just for the average person off the street, because it's so shocking to the ideology of the person who takes them, which is why so many of these substances have cultures which teach us how to use them and can prepare us, for what it may entail. They can be quite shocking, because it reveals that the world is bigger than we thought, and that there is more to it than we thought. And that in itself can have a big effect on people's psyches.
Yeah.
Huh. I never considered.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good thing to highlight about, the show too, is as documentary filmmakers, I mean, we're trying to comment on how there's cons with these things as well. Nothing's perfect, and the shamanistic community has its strengths and its weaknesses, and, all the medicines are being commoditized in the modern world, and so that has negatives along with it as well. So, we're there to kind of show the beauty and amazing things with these things, because like Rack has highlighted, I mean, the esoteric is what's on in the inside. And I kind of think as the esoteric as being for like the Jedi, and the exoteric is what's on the outside. So we can only really show the exoteric on camera, but ultimately the show is kind of maybe a piece to document these things in a very kind of cinematic visual way for people that are interested in seeing what some of these experiences look like for people exoterically on the outside. But then ultimately it's like the Matrix, right? Like where you don't have any idea what it's really like until you directly experience it for yourself.
Yeah, I think you did a good job though at showing people's exoteric or their esoteric experience. I mean, it definitely came across that these people that in your first episode at least had profound, potentially healing experiences for sure. Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. And that's the thing is that we tried to show the seriousness of the medicine, and again, like how it's there's no messing around with this stuff. It's not recreational and it's very serious stuff. But if you go into it with the right setting and the right mindset, and engage your kind of, like to use the term, like your will to want to either expand your consciousness or heal yourself from some sort of ailment that you've had. If you kind of have those parts, you can have the most kind of beautiful, life transforming experience of your life. And that's kind of that's basically what we had on the episode. We had one gentleman in the episode who, took probably a little bit more than he needed to. And again, it's not like you can overdose on this stuff unless you have some horrible heart condition or something, but he did take more than he needed to. So we had one person that had a very trying experience on the show because of that. Yeah. But, it's like, that's the dynamic, is like that's why it's also good to do it with somebody that's of, high moral character and is an honorable person that's worked with the medicine and knows like the whole dynamics and the intricacies with it, so that you have that beautiful kind of life transforming experience. And that's something that, this show is not only kind of a piece of filmmaking that I'm extremely proud of, it's also something that, after we were done making the show, I tried the medicine as well. So it was absolutely a completely life transforming experience for me. And that's not documented in the show itself, but it's just something to kind of speak to the direct life experience I had. That's, a beautiful thing, because you can only kind of really ultimately speak about your own direct experiences. I was just going to ask you that too, if you did that. Yeah, I did. And that's the beauty of shamanism, is it's like, you don't need any middlemen between you and something greater. And I almost think of the metaphor of like, you've either got your computer that's just air gapped, it's not connected to anything, or else you've got your computer that's connected to the internet. So when you take one of these things and you do it in the proper respect and proper setting and the proper context, it's like you're suddenly connected to the astral internet, and you can have a beautiful, kind of divine transcendent experience. So I did have the pleasure of doing the medicine at the end of the kind of filming of the final finale of the episode. And it was incredibly life transforming. I'll probably do a whole kind of, like you guys do on the show, a whole kind of side trip report as to like all the kind of information that I got, because I had an amazing kind of what's called a Kensho moment of this kind of gnosis of amazing kind of many downloads that happen in a short amount of time, because it's quite short. I mean, it only lasts depends on how much you take, but it only lasts for probably 5 or 10 minutes, at least for me it did. Oh, yeah. So it's relatively life transforming.
It's even shorter than
very short amount of time.
Is that a question?
Yeah, that's crazy. It seems like those powerful ones don't seem to last long.
Go ahead, man. Yeah, it's very short. It's very, very short. I mean, I think that if you look at DMT, it looks like we lost Rackman. We might want to add him back to the call. But if you look at DMT in terms of, obviously it's endogenous to our brain, but in terms of the kind of varying degrees of DMT, I mean, there's different kind of formations of phenylaline and dimethyltryptamine that are secreted naturally within the brain. Yeah. And those are things that happen when we're in like sleep, for example, and like REM sleep. But if you look at NN-DMT, which is the DMT that Terence McKenna oftentimes talked about, that's a very visual form of dimethyltryptamine. And then 5-MeO-DMT, which is what's in the toad, is a very different experience. And it's very different in terms of the amount that you take and the experience that you have. And then Octavio also has a separation between 5-MeO-DMT and the toad medicine, because the toad is the natural form of this.
Oh, yeah, right.
5-methoxy and dimethyltryptamine. So there's almost like a third differentiation there, where he advocates that he has a separation between 5-MeO and toad medicine. So that's a kind of dynamic where there's so much to kind of learn about this stuff and so much to kind of understand in the different modalities and different kind of balances of these earth medicines. So, do we want to add Rack back?
Yeah, I did once, and he's gone. He's gone again. So I'll try again here and see. So Niles,
didn't bulldoze his house.
Is that experience still pretty clear in your mind after a bit of time has gone by?
It is. And I did a kind of download of my conversation with some gals that I've had on my podcast who are really good friends that are related to my other documentary project.
Yeah.
So probably to that is at some point I will make that public. I will publicly share like my whole experience. So I'll send that to you guys when it's ready. And I know you get a lot of kick out of it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You can only really talk about your own experiences. And if somebody kind of feels the call to these things or is interested in these things, it's good to obviously do the research and see what kind of pro and con experiences others have had. But when you get the kind of firsthand, around the campfire conversation of what somebody else experienced, it's nice because it builds that kind of camaraderie and that fellowship to know that people have had beautiful, life-changing experiences off these things that have either, like we highlighted before, there's kind of only really two reasons why you'd want to take this medicine. And it's not for recreational purposes. It's not for just tripping out for fun. It's for either A, healing, which is, coming into wholeness. Like, so we're not like George Gurdjieff says, where we're just machines we are born and machines we will die, where we just go to our 9-to-5 jobs every day and repeat until we die. It's like we realize there's more to life than that. And that's part of kind of the healing process, is understanding what it is to be a human being, but also the expansion of your consciousness, your consciousness being your kind of way that you see the world and the, way that you interact with the world. And Mark Passio has a definition of consciousness where it's your ability and awareness to recognize patterns and meanings, both externally in the world and internally within yourself. And sadly today, we have a lot of people that the consciousness is so low, it's almost, unbelievable how low it is. So we have a lot of people that kind of could use these direct experiences. It's all about your direct experience.
Yeah. Well, we keep losing Rack here, but I keep trying to get him back. Are you there now, Rack? Okay, he keeps dropping off. Niles, do you want to mention some of the other, or how people can watch these documentaries? They go to your website, which is obviously in the show notes. They can click on that. But can you talk a little bit about the logistics of your sites and how to get this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had a little bit of technical problems here, but I think we got the gist of it. And obviously, Rack is so eloquent about speaking on this. I kind of just let him do his thing a bit. So it's nice that it worked out that way. But it's like, so basically the show is available at shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. That's kind of the home base that we have for it. That's the official site. And as something where the subject matter of the show is so kind of paradigm destroying, I almost want to say that it's a little ahead of its time, this show. So it's not like you're going to be seeing it blasted across, Amazon.com or Netflix anytime soon. So it's something that was created just independently by Rack and I as this, series. I mean, we made it for very little money. We made it for less money than, the typical film uses on their food budget in a single day. And as somebody that's worked in and out of Hollywood, I could personally tell you that, there's a lot of money spent on film sets every day. And for somebody that's an independent filmmaker that's just trying to always work on more kind of conscious projects, my background in Hollywood kind of really showed me what I could do and what not to do, especially in terms of money spent. Mm-hmm. So it was something that was made for very little money. And, it's something that as a bottom up product, it's basically like something where we're just doing it as a direct to audience thing. So you can always be watched there. And it's something that we are, having as a paid download or a rental, because there's kind of a significant cost to make each episode. So it's something where it's nice to make it a sustainable venture where we can just have a little bit of a cost for people to rent the show or to purchase the show. But, I want people should really think of this as kind of like a community support thing, where think of it as kind of a donation to help kind of keep the process going, where we're just kind of, as documentary filmmakers, trying to show these experiences for people. And there's so many different kind of earth medicines that are also different, that we're trying to, from show to show, really use this as a nice piece of not only cinema that's beautifully shot and well documented and well, directed. Hopefully, that's kind of always my intention as the main person behind the camera. But then with kind of Rack's, knowledge base and ties to the community, and obviously like eloquence talking about the material as the kind of guy in front of the camera, I think it's just a beautiful kind of combination of our kind of synergistic skill sets. So you can always see it there. And, you can find it at social media as well. But, it's nice to kind of go onto these platforms and share it as well, like your guys' show. And these kind of, there's so much great media online these days because the internet has just changed everything. Yeah. So for us, it's kind of like a product where it's like a book, where we've written our book and then we have to basically just kind of go around and kind of share it just to kind of get the word out. It's something that's very much a bottom-up product.
Yeah.
We'll definitely do our best to spread it as far as we can. So, I mean, Renty, it's fair. That's sort of value for value. You watch a show, cost you guys some money, throw a couple bucks your way. And is there any sort of monthly subscription people can get on to kind of keep getting the new one sent to them?
No, I mean, there is, we might have it on some services potentially down the line. That'll be some subscription services that would be elsewhere, but you can always watch it at the official site. So that's kind of the kind of best way to go direct to source to do it, is kind of a donation that really just kind of helps fund future episodes, because I mean, if we do this show, obviously it's something where we very much want to go around the world with it and not only just show people document the experiences authentically, but also go to the original countries where these sacraments kind of originated. Like, for example, on the second episode, we're probably looking to do it with a medicine called ibogaine, which has huge healing properties, where if somebody is hooked on some, junk narcotic like methamphetamine or heroin, if you have the ability and want and will to heal yourself, because ultimately you can only heal you. We are ultimately the medicine, and the earth medicine is only kind of like the catalyst to allow you to heal yourself. Iboga can be a huge, amazing thing for like curing, heroin addiction on one iboga use. So again, it depends on the individual, it depends on the experience, it depends on the container. But so that's, for example, something that we would shoot in Africa, in Gabon, Africa. So there'd be quite a, cost as an independent show to get out there and do it. So, it's, we're taking it one step at a time. I mean, it's just, as an independently made series, it's something that we basically have to just kind of do episode per episode whenever we can.
Right.
There's no set.
What about some of the other stuff?
Like a book series again.
What about some of the other stuff you're working on there, Niles?
Yeah, well, I mean, this show is kind of Rack-and-I's dynamic, and is something that he kind of conceptualized, and I kind of helped him make, and we have the perfect skill sets to counter it. It's kind of one of the main primary projects. I also have a documentary film I'm working on that I think last time I chatted with you guys, I hinted on, which is something I'm doing with a philosopher and esotericist named Neil Kramer. Yeah. Which is called Transmutation. And actually, that's another project that's a documentary film that we're just finishing. So that's my next project.
Yeah, it looks cool.
Coincidentally, yeah, thank you, man. I'd started it prior to this show, and because documentaries can take so long to make, it's actually going to be concluded. It's going to be done next year, early next year, so very soon. So that can be seen you can view kind of the info for that at transmutationfilm.com. So those are kind of my two products that I sound like a capitalist. My two kind of
slapchop
pieces of creativity that I'm, making as my primary kind of things as an independent filmmaker these days. But, and I think that's the dynamic these days, is just making stuff that you kind of find a connection with people or a connection with an audience, and you almost go straight to the audience. And I don't want to say completely bypass the middleman these days, but create stuff that people are interested in. And the only way you're going to create content like the content that I'm doing, which is hopefully has high production values with really kind of leading edge, almost ahead of its time content, is to do that kind of, independently. So you see kind of the best stuff from the bottom up, as we very well know, with things like your guys' show or podcasts. It's about, grassroots.
I think that value for value or on-demand programming is the future anyway. Like, I mean, sure, Netflix and Amazon Prime and things like that might be good outlets, but I mean, the cable dinosaur is dying fast. People are unplugging like crazy, and it's just a matter of time until, people are going to pick and choose what little outlets. Instead of having $100 a month bill for cable, they're going to spend their $100 a month on some video content here and some audio content there. And I think you guys are out in front of it, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you, fellas. I mean, it's always nice to talk to you. I appreciate, what you guys are doing. I know that we've shared commonalities, and people that have started podcasts as well, about just the, community outreach outreach and the nice dynamic of doing something that you've created yourself that's kind of a conscious thing that allows you to kind of spread your wings and meet new people and kind of connect with community. So that's something that my work I'm hoping to always do as well. And I think this show is a nice vehicle to do, even though it's kind of a new piece of, intellectual, it's kind of new content that, just have to kind of get out as the word spreads kind of from the community.
Right on. Yeah, I agree. Thanks, man. So, hey, I tried to get Rack on a couple times here, but it failed again. So you'll have to say bye to him for us and thank him for coming on and thank you for coming on as well.
Yeah, thank you for having us, man. I'm sure that, it was nice to get both of us on, even with our kind of slight technical difficulties. But we really appreciate it, man. And thanks for doing what you guys are doing as always. It's a pleasure anytime I talk to both of you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Niles.
Next time we'll have to do in studio.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know you guys have done a lot of work on your studio, so it'd be great to see it one day.
All right. Okay, thanks a lot, Niles. Okay.
Cheers, fellas. Bye.
Well, despite some questionable audio, that was okay. That was a good one. That was a great chat.
Yeah, it was a good movie.
Drives me nuts, those little audio hiccups.
Yeah.
Just like picking away at it's like if you just sat here and poked me in the head the whole time.
Yeah.
It is election night.
I can't do anything.
Oh, that could have something to do with it.
Oh,
right?
just the amount of people using the internet. That's people refreshing.
Oh, maybe.
Refresh.
Maybe, just millions of people refreshing. Actually, you're probably right.
Oh, it's like huger.
Yeah.
Way bigger than Super Bowl.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And he was the American guy, right? Because our feed was fine and Australia was fine.
That's right. Huh.
Yeah.
Crazy. Oh, we live on the best internet street in Alberta.
Do you?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, probably in Canada.
Just guessing. I don't know.
It doesn't get much better than that, I don't think.
It's that cable connection, and I'm like, there's only like 4 people on it.
So yeah, that was good. It was a really good episode. Very, very real.
Big thanks to Niles and Rack for coming on the show. Any comments before we wrap it up, Michael, on your fly on the wall experience?
No, it's just great being here, looking around the studio. You guys have a lot of cool stuff to check out, and listening to Niles. They're both just a wealth of information, and it's good to see life from that perspective.
Exactly. It gives us hope, sort of, right? I mean, there's a whole awakening going on in the background that if you're not really aware of it, you won't see it. So I got a question for you, Mike. Darren and I were traveling through the States, and he got to go to his little dispensary, and I was like, they're going to have this for mushrooms soon.
I said no.
They'll have
not
like
close. No,
a
there's
little
no
like
chance.
psilocybin dispensary. Different strains of mushrooms and all that. How long do you think it'll take for that?
I don't know. It's hard to say because, the marijuana was taken out for a reason. The marijuana was taken out for a reason, so bringing it back could only also be for a reason. Now, I don't know.
I don't see mushrooms in our lifetime.
Yeah,
Really?
I don't either.
I didn't see pot in our lifetime. I mean, we should just be happy with that. I mean, fucking seriously, it's only full legal in like 3 or 4 states. I mean, Florida got the medical vote tonight. So shout out to Adam Loyal. He's all excited about that.
It would be nice to see if it wasn't criminal.
Yeah.
At least, decriminalization, I think, would be a victory.
Yeah.
Would be a victory in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So I can get a fine. I could pay the fine. Everybody wins except me. I'm on 150.
So would you smoke your DMT then? Or what if I look that up right now and it's legal?
Alleged DMT. It's not legal.
It's not? You've already looked into that?
Not. I'm not an idiot. It's a Schedule 1 narcotic, I'm pretty sure.
In Canada?
Yeah. Huh. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it is. So I stick to my medicine. It's legal. I have a card in my wallet. It says fuck off.
Look, it just pops up right away. Right away. Where do you get DMT?
Oh, man, people constantly comment on the YouTube episodes. Any YouTube episode we does that have DMT in the description, people are in the comments trying to sell you DMT.
No way.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Send us your cash. I guarantee it's mostly scams.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. People get in that mode and they're like, oh, being all probably sending bitcoins, or you're on the dark web, and then all of a sudden you're fucking $50 less lighter.
Canada. DMT is Schedule 3 in Canada.
That's not bad. It's like a slap on the wrist.
There you go.
There you go. I can't even get a joint into you.
No.
Anyway, big thanks to Niles and Rack for coming on the show. Check out grimerica.ca/support and help us upgrade the internet so we don't get those annoying cutouts. Seriously, though, help us stay ad sponsor affiliate bullshit free. Sign up for a monthly subscription or do a one-time donation. Spam grab. What else?
Review us on iTunes.
Review the show.
Please.
Just go into the show notes and do all the stuff that we ask you to do there.
Yeah, there's
Seriously.
a whole list. There's a do list.
That's right. If you did everything on the list, it would take you like 15 minutes. You know how long we spend every week putting this show together for you? You can spend the 15 minutes. I think that's it, eh?
Yeah, that's it, man.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.